All
All
right,
right.
so 33 in, go for it.
Cool. I will kick things off. I'll start slow, so if anyone's running a little bit late, they can hop on in. Hi, everyone. My name's James. I've been with the class team for quite a while. I'm seeing a lot of names here that I recognize, which is always very exciting. So to everyone I recognize, hi. To everyone I don't recognize, also hi. And hopefully we'll be talking a little bit more soon and I'll start to get to know you a bit better. I've been on the class team for forever now. I've been on the class team for 2.5 years, 3 years, which means that I've been there for quite a while in IT terms. We're doing a bit of a combo training today on both reports and accountability. We've scheduled out quite a bit of time to get through this one. Optimistically, I'll get through things quick enough that I leave you all a lot of time to answer questions. I know that it's probably the most intense accountability and reporting time there is in the entire year. So my goal is to let you have as much time to hit us with questions as we can. On that, we've got Samuel from the ICT team as well. Samuel, can you wave? Hopefully people can see you. Samuel's waving. We've also got Claire here, and Claire's my boss. They're going to kind of jump in and help answer a few questions as we go. Sometimes they'll throw the questions over to me if they're particularly weird and it might be fun to talk about them a little bit. But optimistically, my goal in every training is to get through things way earlier than we said we were going to finish. And then I will tell every single one of your bosses that you were in fact here the entire time. You can just leave early and call it a day. I promise I'll vouch for you. That's about the goal. This is the largest one that I've done purely online so far. So please forgive me for any weird technical issues, but I think we're going to be okay. Cool. All right. I'm going to be sharing my screen most of the time. I like to do a lot of live demonstrations as much as I possibly can. And hopefully as we go through that, hopefully it'll be pretty easy. All of the data that you're going to see when I do examples for reporting is fake data. If you see any incredible insights that you find incredibly compelling, please be aware that it's just dummy data that we put in randomly, and don't draw any conclusions based on that. I'm thinking that I'm probably going to start with conversations around reporting, then afterwards tie that into accountability. So if you're here purely for accountability and you don't care about a thing that I have to say about reporting, sorry. But hopefully I'm going to have something new and interesting in there for just about everyone. All right, I reckon I'll get started. I'm going to try sharing my screen and connecting it over. If you've got any questions, please chuck them in. I would much rather you overloaded us with questions as they come to you and we can kind of address them as they're relevant. Don't hold your questions to the end. Just dump them on us. Let me hop into a fake class center. Alrighty, there we go. My internet's probably going to be chugging along a little bit when I'm connecting to so many people, but that's how it goes. Hopefully you can all see me logging into a class screen. Can I get a thumbs up? Yeah, cool. I'm getting a nod. Excellent. I'm not going to talk too much on some of the real fundamental basics. So if I'm losing you right now by having logged into class, might not be the training for you on this one. Might need to do an intro to class training. Most of what I'm going to focus is in this section here, the reports and accountability section. If there's anything that you'd like to talk about that, otherwise, I don't know, bring them up at the end and we'll see if we can. I know that nothing really falls into neat baskets when it comes to reporting, so we might need to have a little bit more in the Q&A section at the end, but we'll do what we can. So in terms of the reporting section, it's probably worth noting that reporting is generally only available if you are a class admin or advanced admin, meaning if you think you need to be doing reporting for your job, but you don't actually have access to these reports, and what I'm showing you here with the reports and accountability tab, the reports and things. If that's not there for you, it might just be that you need to have a conversation with whoever your center's class administrator is, and they can get that rolling for you. They fix up your permissions there. A lot of what we see here is going to be pretty applicable as well to what state program managers and peaks will see. I'll try to outline when some of it's relevant more specifically to peaks and when some of it's more relevant to centers. I know that we've got quite a few people from quite a few different places on this call. So I'll let you know what's more relevant to you there. All right, so we're in a reporting list here. If you note down the bottom, we've got 61 different reports and 61 different ways we can cut your data. That's a lot. That's a really overwhelming amount, and remembering what all 61 reports does is going to be a bit of a fool's errand. So there's a couple of ways to kind of do it. Number one is to just remember a few of the more important ones. Just have them set to memory that you always need to run reports A, B, and C. I'll run through that for you as well. I'll tell you some of the ones that I tend to rely on. Another way is to understand the naming convention and the numbering convention that we have here, so that you can kind of use that a little bit more to your advantage and think, well, I know the idea of what I need to run. Let me piece it together and work out exactly how I can work out the report I need. And the third and final one is just ask us. It's a horrific job to memorize all 61, but someone's got to do it. And unfortunately, that's me. So it's kind of on me to remember all of these. Samuel, unfortunately, also gets lumped with this task. So if you're thinking, look, I've tried a few of the reports, I can't find what it is, and I don't want to run 61 reports to hopefully find the one, get in touch with us. Just ask us, hey, I'm looking for a report that does this. Hopefully we can point you in the right direction. All right, so I'll talk through the naming conventions first before I point you at the particularly easy and common ones, because that might make it make a little bit more sense. Straight away, what we're seeing here is, the first one is CO1. That just means that it's arbitrarily numbered, number one. We generally try to make, number one the simplest report possible. And as we go through, we kind of build on that. The important part though is that it's the C report. All of the C reports relate to client counts, and that's kind of in opposition to, and they're probably on the second page. Oh, there's a few here. The S reports, which are service counts. If you're not really sure which one you're looking for and you're not really sure how to go about it, I recommend just kind of vocalizing what it is you're looking for, the data it is you're looking for. Because inevitably at some point you'll say, well, really, I'm trying to find the main language that's spoken at home by clients, right? At some point you're going to say the word services or clients, and you'll work out whether it is a C report or an S report you need. That's pretty simple. Yeah.
Should everybody be able to see all 61 reports?
No, that's an excellent question. I have all 61 reports because I need to. As a general rule, we don't limit reports from you because of, we're trying to keep secrets from you. But for state program managers and peaks, for instance, they're going to see less reports because in this list, we've also got our DIY reports. And peaks and state program managers don't get access to DIY reports. As well as that, on some permissions, we've removed these M reports. And this actually ties in really well. These M reports stand for management. They're kind of a way for the state program managers to get a really quick oversight as to how things are going in accountability. So I'll talk on them a little bit more in the accountability portion of things. But ultimately, we've given them to a lot of the center roles, but they're probably not very helpful. The reason we did that is because we felt a bit weird about giving something to state program managers and giving them a way to view the work that you're doing that you don't really see yourself. That didn't feel quite right to us. So we just wanted to give it to you as well so you knew what they see, if that makes sense. So most of the time you probably won't use the M reports. I certainly don't ever, but they're there. After the C reports, we do have our D reports. These are new ones. That's for the data-informed planning toolkit. That's probably going to be news to almost all of you. It's a new tool that we have developed, are developing to kind of give centres a bit of an entry point into doing a level of analysis themselves. We know that not every centre out there has the capacity to delve into data analysis. So we've made a tool and are kind of working on it, and hopefully soon it'll be available and fantastic and amazing. But it kind of lets you, it does a lot of that entry analysis for you. So you don't need to run them unless you're using the tool. We've got our DIY reports, and I'll talk about DIY reports towards the end of the reporting section, because let's face it, it is probably the most complicated part of reporting, but it's just good to know that they're all there. Apart from that, we have the N reports, N for November, or N for NPA, which stands for National Partnership Agreement. A lot of you probably do receive NPA funding. If I'm saying NPA and you're thinking, what is that? I have no idea what that is. Maybe there's a good chance your centre doesn't receive that kind of portion of funding. That's okay. But essentially, the National Partnership Agreement is one of the biggest funding agreements we have as a sector overall. So we've made a few reports in here that answer specific funding requirements. Some of you might know under NPA agreements, 90% of your representation services need to be to financially disadvantaged clients, right? So we made a report that explicitly runs that for you and does that calculation for you to be able to say, here's where you sit on the National Partnership Agreement. That's kind of the idea of the N reports, is that we're answering a really specific set of predetermined questions. If you don't receive NPA funding, most of the time they're probably not going to be that helpful to you, but there's actually a couple that I rely on just because they're good. They're nice reports anyway. So I'll talk on those in just a minute. And finally, we've got a little PT one in here. That's for problem types. It's one of our only standard reports that looks at problem types, not high-level problem types. If you need that distinction explained, let us know and I can go into it a little bit more. But essentially what it says is, it just says, you know, here's the top 20 most common problem types. When you're running it from a center perspective, it's easy. It just says, here's the most common top 20 for you. Breaks them down into percentages as well as counts. It's nice like that. But then if you're running it from, say, a state level or a, like a peak or state program manager level, it's going to aggregate all of the centers, smush them together and say, look, here's the commonality between all your centers, which is a pretty easy and convenient way to go.
James, please, can you explain a bit more about the high-level problem type?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to jump in here because I think this is probably the easiest way to explain it. So hopefully if I start saying law type, that's going to make sense. Ultimately, a lot of the work that we do is broken down into law type. That's family law, civil law, criminal law. Then we've got another one there, which is specifically for the legal system in general. That's not specific enough to classify a lot of the work. So what we do is we then classify high-level problem types from that. So once this loads up, there we go. So for instance, within family law, it groups into high-level problem types of child support, spouse maintenance. I'm sure there's going to be some other ones there, parenting arrangements, for instance. And those are the high-level problem types. But then we break those down even further for a center level, for a center-specific idea, to choose individual problem types. And that could be within parenting arrangements. It could be about adoption or child residency or something like that. Most of the reports that we've built, most of the standard ones, and pretty much everything that, say, peaks or state program managers see, tend to focus around these high-level pieces of information. Whereas when centers actually are selecting, they're generally choosing them based off the individual problem types. So from the standard reports, PT01 is the only report that actually looks at problem type. If you need to do anything else, you'd use a DIY report.
James, one of our participants has said they don't have access, they don't have the PT report. Should everyone have access to that?
In theory, yes. It's odd that you don't. In theory, a class administrator might have set up a permission to specifically exclude that one. Let us know. Get in touch with the help desk. We'll have a look into it. It's odd that you don't have that specific report.
Cool. And another one, can you hide the reports that you don't use?
Oh, absolutely. It's a little bit of work to do it. You need to kind of adjust your permissions. It's probably something that the first time, get in touch with us and we'll show you how to do it. I won't go into it here because it's a little bit off the beaten track. But it's something I very, very much recommend doing.
And the last question for this section, if a user requires reports for problem types, do they need to create a DIY report and not use these standard reports?
Yeah, the standard reports are very much built for high-level problem types specifically. If you've got any agreement that requires you to use individual problem types, you will need a DIY report. I would double check though that when they say problem type, they aren't referring to high-level problem type. That's one of the kind of language issues that we find gets a little bit muddied when we talk between centers, peaks, and state program managers. A lot of the people who don't use class day-to-day refer to high-level problem types just as problem types. So let me close that one down. If you're like me and you've got the attention span to deal with maybe 5 minutes more worth of training, and after that your brain is completely gone, that's okay. I'm going to give you the really quick notes to hopefully get you started from this point on. I'll point you in the direction of a few of the really good solid reports, ones that I tend to rely on and ones that a lot of centers tend to rely on more than others. That way, worst case scenario, if you tune out everything I say for the next however long, you'll probably still get a bit of value out of the training anyway. All right, so I'm going to give you 2 reports that are going to cover probably 90% of the reports that you need to run. It certainly covers more than that for me. And I'm going to give you a very helpful, easy way to remember them as well. We've got report C03. That's clients by priority group. If you're going to write anything down that I say, this is probably the one thing to write down. C03 and scrolling to find it, S01. Those are the 2 to remember. If you ever don't have your notes in front of you, easy way to remember. C is the 3rd letter of the alphabet, C03. S is the 19th letter of the alphabet. It's a terrible way to remember something, so we made it number 1. There's your helpful way of remembering how we do it. So I'll run CO3 first of all and give you a quick look at what it is. Some of you might be familiar enough that you can kind of tune a little bit of this out of there, but I'll show you some cool things, not just for reporting, but also for analysis and the way that I like to use things as well. All right, so I've opened up report CO3. The way that the reports are built, the filter panel, tend to be pretty similar on most of the reports. So if I explain it to you here, hopefully it'll make sense for the rest of it. We need to put in a start date and an end date because every report is looking at the amount of work that you did between 2 time periods. That can be a little bit confusing to get your head around sometimes because sometimes people say, well, I don't want it between a time period. I want to know all of the clients we've seen ever. Well, ever is still a time period. At some point, you probably started doing your work. And at some point, you probably stopped saying, oh, I don't need to know exactly what we did next week, for instance. So if you wanted to do all time, you might, run the report back a few decades, depending on how long your center's been open, and just run it to today. But a lot of the time, you might say, look, let's make it real simple. I'm going to go 1st of July to the 30th of June. Now, those little calendars do appear up in there and you can select them through that or hit today. You can also type in your responses, whatever you're comfortable with. Funding categories is where things get a little bit more interesting and a little bit more fun and a little bit more complicated. Now, if you're thinking, look, I just want to look at all my data. I want to get everything. I don't need to break it down by specific funding streams. Great, fantastic. You just open up your funding category list. You click on this very, very top box right next to name. And it's just selecting every single funding category underneath it. That's easy. However, some of you might say, well, actually, I don't need everything. I'm running this report on specific funding categories, in which case I'll remove that there. I might say, I only really need this on bushfire assistance, at which point it's only going to be running the report on that. Or I might say, look, everything that sits in this category underneath no more, all of these child funding categories, let's group them all together. I want to run a report on all of these, right? Might be something like that. At the end of the day, every centre's got a different list of these funding categories, depending on how you've customized, depending on how your state kind of distributes that funding. So we can't give you a hard and fast rule as to which ones you should and shouldn't include. But if you're looking at your list and you're really confused about what you're seeing, have a chat with us. We might not have the answers straight away because it's not the same for every centre, but we can at least point you in the right direction and say, okay, this is a customization that you did maybe a couple of years ago, could be historical organizational knowledge. It's just kind of vanished, it happens. Or we might say, actually, that's the way your state program manager wants it divided. We can point you in some directions there to get some more answers. For now, I'm going to run it on everything because, as I said, this is a dummy database. None of it really makes sense anyway. I'm just going to load the report based on that. I do have a couple of other sections here, and I'll get into that a little bit as well. But right now, I just want to show you what a report looks like. All right, so we've got CO3 here. This is essentially going to tell you, let's zoom in a little bit. Hopefully you can all see it here. Let's make that even bigger. Hopefully it makes sense for everyone else, but I have awful eyes. There we go. So just in case you can't see, I'll read it out a little bit as we go as well. It's essentially saying, look, for the centre that we are, which we've got ourselves a dummy CLCs Australia database here, during the period we saw 95 clients. What it does is it breaks those up into the information that we've got. So it says, look, 11 of those were male, we had 5 female, 1 of other gender, and 78 of unknown. It does a lot of different breakdowns, but I'm going to start focusing on this one because it kind of outlines something that's probably important to know for your data. You'll probably know if you tend to use class for data entry, putting the actual services in, that male, female, other, and unknown aren't probably the exact options that you have when you're in the gender dropdown. And that's because what we need to do is we need to collect a bunch of other responses and collect them up together to meet the data standards manual. Now, if I'm saying data standards manual and it's not making sense, that's okay. The Attorney General's Department released the National Legal Assistance Data Standards Manual to essentially say, here's how you need to define your data, define your services, define all that. And one of the things we get out of that is how to define, for instance, gender options. So whatever you decide you want to put into your system, let's say your centre gets explicit funding to help trans clients, for instance, transgender clients. What you can do is have those options parent up where they need to. So you can say, look, specifically, we're helping trans women, but we need to know when we're helping trans women as opposed to cisgender women. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new child option called trans women. It's still going to parent up to women. We're still going to have our women count. At the end of the day, the reports are going to be fine, but we can run our own custom option. And that's how most of this in here is going to work. You know, you might not necessarily be saying low, medium, high income. You might be saying amounts. But what these standard reports are designed to do is to parent those options up and say, look, let's just have this make sense. Let's simplify it and let's make it really clear for you there. Indigenous Australians, for instance, the actual responses include things like, yes, Aboriginal, yes, Torres Strait Islander, yes, both Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander heritage, and that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, a lot of what you need for reports is just a yes, no blanket answer. And that's what these are designed to do. I'd recommend loading this report and looking through all of the various options that you have available to you. I don't need to talk through them now, but just get an idea of what's there. All right, I'm going to jump into some of the other fun things that we can do to kind of cut this report up into interesting ways. I haven't been interrupted for any questions yet on this section. Excellent. Cool. Keep the questions coming as you've got them. I'm more than happy to be led off the path a little bit. So right here, we've got a catchment section in the filter panel. Right now, we're just running it by center. So essentially what we're saying is, look, tell us all this data by the center that we've got. It's going to be your default. You're going to run it most of the time anyway. You can run it down by office location, if that's something that your center does to divide it up, or you can do it by outreach location as well. Now, centers can do that cut down. They can see by individual office locations and outreach locations and things like that. But peaks and state program managers don't. They don't see that cut down. When I say peaks, I do also mean us, the class team, and CLCs Australia as well. That's information that's generally regarded as, we don't need to see exactly how you're handling it. That's information for you. What we can all do though is aggregate by administrative boundary. Now, some of you are going to see this work and think, oh, okay, sure, great, fine. And some of you are going to think this is the coolest thing ever. I'm in the second basket. This is my favorite thing in the world, but some people have an actual life and real interests, and I can't fault them for that. So here we've got administrative boundary type, and this is your way of saying, look, for all the services or the clients, whatever it is, let's actually split this up by suburb. And remember, there's not going to be much data in this dummy set here, but you've been collecting information on, you know, where all of your clients are coming in, where they're located from. Let's zoom it all the way back in. And we're going to say, all right, so 36 of our clients, we didn't actually get a location on, but we had one in Aintree, one in Arncliffe, a couple in Belconnen. There you go. So essentially it's a list of all the suburbs and splitting it out like that, which is nice for just a number of clients, but it can also let you know, well, where are we getting our clients that are 65 and over, right? Because a lot of the time, the Australian Bureau of Statistics will say, okay, these particular areas have a lot of clients 65 and over. And you can kind of compare that to your own data and say, well, the ABS is saying there's a ton of 65 and over people living in this area. Why aren't we seeing them? What's going on? And that's a really quick, easy way of saying, well, actually, there's a little bit of unmet legal need there. That's a bit of a quick snapshot and idea for you. We've got suburb and postcode there. One thing that we do actually do, and this is, again, I think it's really cool. I'm so sorry for everyone who was snoozing through this bit. This is my favorite thing in the world. There's a lot of centers out there who put in their general address information, you know, the street someone lives on, suburb, postcode, whatever it is. Maybe it's only part of that. And what we do with that information is we actually say, well, you've given us enough information that we can actually assign that to statistical areas, which is how the ABS breaks down their own data. I keep using an acronym and I shouldn't. I'm really sorry for everyone who's possibly getting confused. ABS stands for the Australian Bureau of Statistics. Please call me out every time I use an acronym. I can't assume everyone knows everything that sits in my head. What we do though is we also do the same thing for electoral divisions, local government areas and that sort of thing. So it might be useful for you to just be putting in that information, but one day you might say, well, actually, we want to go and advocate with this particular MP. You know, say, hey, you should be funding the CLC sector more. Straight away, you can just say, well, we're talking to a Commonwealth MP. Can we just have a chat with them and say, you know, we're seeing, let me zoom in here. Hey, member for Barton, we're seeing 13 clients in your area. Now, we're operating off a really small sample size here, but you yourself probably have a few more people in your database. And at the end of the day, it's a much more compelling story to be able to say, well, actually, member for Canberra, we're seeing a ton of clients with disability in your area. Maybe you should fund us a little bit more. It's just a way of giving you that kind of advocacy step. And I can talk to death about advocacy, but you know your data better than I do.
James, this sounds like a great topic for another webinar because we're getting lots of feedback on how cool it is. So,
oh, good, excellent. I'm glad that my enthusiasm isn't going out into the void.
Got a question. Can you use boundary options for each office location, or is it only one or the other?
In the standard reports, it's one or the other. If you wanted to put it in a DIY report to kind of cut it all together, absolutely you can. And I'll try and remember that. I'll try and make it one of my examples because it's a cool example, but remind me.
Yeah, great. I've got two more. One centre only deals with clients up to 25 years old. Is there any way to make a better breakdown of age?
DIY reports.
Okay.
Most of my answers are going to be, yeah, we can't do it in a standard. Absolutely, we can do it in a DIY.
Okay, that's it. Great, thanks. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, so that's about it in terms of the administered boundaries. There's a few other types that I haven't really gone into, but generally if it's one of the recognized geographic boundary types by the ABS, by the, I'm going to say PSMA, but I can't remember what that acronym stands for. Basically, if it's one of the more commonly used boundary types, we're going to give you the ability to break down your data by that. That's kind of an easy way to do it.
Okay, just got a couple more questions. James, if you find a suburb that looks out of place, how can you find which client it relates to?
You're absolutely going to hate me. DIY reports is my quick answer.
Okay. And in this report, the CO3 report, if the catchment area is by centre, total clients is one number, and if you complete it by suburbs, the total number of clients is different. Why is that? That might be one for the help that we can do on help desk if you can't immediately answer it. Yeah,
that's actually a really good question. So the trick is, let's say you've got one client. Let's say you run the report and it says, cool, you had one client in this time period. Then you run it by suburb and it says, all right, you had one client in Redfern and you had one client in Newtown, right? Apologies for the very Sydney-centric examples here, but, that's what I got. What that might actually mean is during that period of time, you did only have one client, but that client had two services. And in those two services, they actually lived in two different places. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, well, yes, you saw one client in Newtown, you saw one client in Redfern. That is true. You can't really take the total then as a good example. What you need to do is remove that, because the question that you're asking is, how many clients did I see in this suburb? Not how many clients did I see overall. Hopefully I've made a little bit of sense there, but there is a really good reason why that happens. Excellent. Am I good to keep on keeping on? Cool. All right, so I'm running it by center again, and I'm going to show you, this one's again maybe a little bit more useful for a kind of data analysis perspective, but still it's one of the really cool things that I want to kind of outline through it. So on these reports, we might see, hey, look, we've got 95 clients. We've got 6 of those clients 0 to 17. And we've got 8 of those clients in outer regional and remote areas. What's the overlap? How many of our clients under that age are outer regional and remote? Are they all outer regional and remote? Are none of them outer regional and remote? Like those are pretty fundamental, important questions that you've got to be asking. We had, I don't remember the number now, but half a dozen clients under 25 or under 18, and 4 clients with a disability. Are all of our clients under 18 the clients with disability? What's the overlap there? And what we can do in this report, I'll shrink these down so they take up a bit less room. We can actually look into the demographics section and we can say, well, only tell me about clients that meet this criteria. So let's start on those under 18s. We've got, there we go, age group as a section. So we're going to say, look, for age group, we only care about those 0 to 17 on this report. Tell me what you got. And what this is going to do, let me move that back out of the way, is it's going to run that report just on those 6 clients. And we can go through here and we can say, okay, well, first of all, 4 of them were experiencing financial disadvantage. 1 of them had a disability or mental illness. So the overlap there Isn't massive, but it's not nothing. Still worth knowing. However, we had, you know, 2 of them experiencing family violence in civil or criminal law. That's a bit more of a significant overlap. Now, I'm dealing with numbers like 6 or 7. You're probably going to be dealing with numbers of 600 or 700 a lot of this time. And that's when these start to be much more compelling stories. But what you can essentially say is, okay, well, we've got a good idea of what's going on here, especially, you know, there's a bit of overlap with people experiencing civil or criminal law 0 to 17. Let's drill into that a little bit further. So let's only look at the clients who are under 18 and experiencing family violence in civil or criminal law. And I know that's a pretty specific question, but at the end of the day, what this is kind of showing you is all these intersections between the different priority groups. It builds a really compelling story for you to be able to say, well, actually, the more areas of disadvantage that someone is experiencing, chances are the worse the legal issues are. We know these are priority groups for a reason, so we can start going and saying, okay, well, we're now only looking at 2 clients. Both of them were male, right? Again, let's imagine these numbers are closer to 200 than they are 2. But starting to be able to see these interesting trends of, you know, none of them had a disability, half of them were Indigenous. Imagining these are actual real numbers, you start to develop a pretty compelling story. And this is a really easy way to kind of cut that data yourself. You don't really need a fantastic data Excel spreadsheet in front of you to be able to do a lot of this. I'm going to leave it at there. I'm going to call that my taste test of that one. Hopefully I've made enough sense on that.
Hey, James, who creates the problem codes? Is it the federal AGD?
Yes, sort of. It's very old historical knowledge that we kind of inherited. And when I say we, I mean the class team and now the sector as a whole. It was, a lot of it is set out again in that National Legal Assistance Data Standards Manual. There's further divisions in there that we get a little bit of influence on, but ultimately that's kind of where it's locked out to. With these reports, just to show you a few things, you can of course print them and send them out, but you can export them in a bunch of different formats. That can be really helpful a lot of the time. So whether that's into a PDF or an image or something like that, fine, absolutely, a Word document if you want. But then all sorts of Excel spreadsheets and a few formats that we thought might be particularly helpful if you're trying to import that data into other more advanced analysis programs. So just to flag that that all exists in there. Right, I might jump out of CO3 and I might run SO1 really quick, just to give you a quick insight on what that looks like. But what you're going to see is that a lot of that actually looks pretty similar to CO3. It runs pretty much the same way. All that really changes is what it is that it's measuring. So straight away, things look pretty similar. We've got our start date, our end date, our funding categories. That's all the same there. Let me just select a few for the sake of this. There we go. We've got our catchment there, so you can still run things by center, administrative boundaries, whatever you like. But when you actually load the report, of course, it's measuring something a little bit different. So SO1 is more about services. At a pretty simple glance, it's service counts. It's just telling you how many of something you did during a certain period of time. So starting a little bit of the way through, certain number of informations and referrals, legal advices. We've got our representation services in here as well. You might notice something weird, like we've got 50,000-ish referrals. I promise you that's not because we're sitting there entering them one by one for dummy data. We did that through bulk insert. On the representation services, we break them down into 3 categories. A lot of funding agreements actually specify that the number you want is representation services closed in a period. It's about the services that you complete in a period. But there are plenty of funding agreements out there that do say, well, actually, we want to know the number that were opened during the period. We do also tell you how many were open at the start of the period so that you kind of get that complete snapshot in there. But at the end of the day, when you're looking at it from a funding agreement perspective, just know which one of these numbers it is that you really need to care about. One of the more interesting things that we get from this report is the client counts. So the total number of clients is there in the system, and that's fine. But we do have these different client definitions. We've got new clients, repeat, and existing clients. And we get a lot of questions on those.
Yeah, I've just got, is the question going to be, why is total clients not the same if you add new client, repeat, and existing clients?
Absolutely. That's one of the questions, but honestly, there's a lot of them that we get in here as well. So the total number of clients is, and I'm going to hopefully simplify this for you. I'll give you a couple of definitions, but at the end of the day, you can look at it all on our online guide. If you see this little, let me get that out of the way. This little question mark in a circle up here, that takes you through to the online guide. Click on that, look up the report. It'll tell you, hey, this is exactly how you know this is calculated. But to give you a really quick snapshot here, total number of clients is the number of unique clients who received a full service. When I say full service, that doesn't include an information or a referral. They only got an info or referral, get them out of here. Not a full client, we don't want to know about them. But counting those ones, everyone else, so if they got legal advices, let's say they got 10 legal advices in a period, great, they are 1 under the number of clients. New clients is clients who received their first service during this period. So I ran it for the financial year, means the first service that they've received in the system was during that financial year. That's an easy one. A lot of questions come on to what's the difference between repeat and existing. A repeat client's where they received a service before the period and then another service during the period that we're looking at. And an existing client is to say they started receiving a service before the period, but that service wasn't actually closed off. So it only applies to ongoing services, so your representations, your ongoing non-legal support, that sort of thing. And it says, look, maybe, you know, the financial year before last, they started a really complicated other representation service, and we're still working on it today. They're going to be included in your existing clients. Now, where that gets a little bit complicated is that technically someone can be an existing client and a repeat client at the same time. They might have started a representation period, a representation service way back when, but then during this period, although the rules say, yes, officially a representation service subsumes other additional services going on, they might have started receiving an ongoing non-legal support way back when and actually had a few legal advices along the way recently. And that way they'd be both a repeat and an existing client. So it's not designed the total number will add up all of these little individual numbers here. It's designed so that all of these numbers should be taken just as a snapshot of that one individual thing. Giving you a very complicated answer to what I'm sure you hope was a much more simple question. I apologize if that makes no sense, but that's the start.
And just to confirm, someone is it helps you if counts the client only if they only got an advice.
Yep.
Okay, great, thanks.
All right, that's SO1. That's a really quick snapshot. I'll give you those two. Those cover 90% of the work that you're going to be doing in reports, and hopefully it'll get you a pretty quick snapshot. Just to give you a few more of the helpful ones that I tend to rely on pretty heavily. So again, if you're writing anything down, make it these ones. NO 3.1 and NO 3.2 tend to be pretty helpful. That's looking at high-level problem types by service type. It kind of compares the two of them. And I'll jump into that one in a minute. If you're doing something that's feeling particularly advanced or tricky, or you really need to drill into something specific, but you're still a little bit hesitant to get into the DIY reports, NO5 is a bit of a tricky one. It's got a lot more of those drop downs on the side, so you can get pretty specific by individual service types on top of things. I won't jump into it now. I'm pretty confident you can play around with it and kind of get your head on it. But I am going to show you that NO 3.1 that we were talking about, because it's a different format of reports. This one's kind of a stepping stone between a standard report and a DIY report. You'll notice in this one, we don't quite have as many things to fill out. We've only really got start date, end date, and funding categories. So let me just select a couple here. Add a funding category, and I'll load the report. Now this report is what we call a drill down report. Don't know if you're ever going to need that term. Hopefully you won't, but this is what it is. Essentially what it does is it turns all that information into one big table. It's taking all of your high-level problem types and comparing it to the number of service types that you received. So in the civil law discrimination area, we did 2 duty lawyer services, right? It gets quite detailed and it's quite a easy way of getting a snapshot, but there's a few cool things that you can do with it. I'm going to answer one of the most common questions before I get anywhere, because this is going to come up at some point. How is it that we delivered 0.33 of a referral service? Is it that we got 1/3 of the way through telling the person and then left the room? Not quite. The idea behind it is with referrals and referrals only. This doesn't apply to other service types. Let's say you deliver a referral and it covers domestic violence prevention orders and immigration law and social security. It's going to take that referral and it's going to put 1/3 of it into each of those different problem types. It's going to say, you know, this one referral is split across all of that. It doesn't do that for, say, a legal advice. If you did a legal advice and it was guardianship for adults, health and housing, it's actually going to put a complete one in each of them. Treats the referrals just a little bit differently because referrals are just that little bit more complicated. That probably doesn't make a lot of sense, but at the end of the day, just know that referrals treat it a little bit differently. So one of the cool things we can do with this is we can actually kind of change how this whole thing is seen and moves around and how it works. Right now, we've got it broken down so the different law types are here, you know, civil law, criminal law, family law, and then it breaks it down into individual high-level problem types. What we can do is we can pull up a field list and we can say, well, I don't really care about the law type. I don't need that. Get rid of it. Cut it out of this report. Take it away. What we're doing is we now just have one massive list of all our problem types. We don't know what law type it's part of, but it's just alphabetized all of that together, right? What we can do is we can even swap where all of these are located. We can say, well, I don't need problem type there necessarily. What if I put it up here next to service type? And now what it's doing is saying, look, for duty lawyer services, here's the high-level problem types that all of them were in. It was only in child support, discrimination, spouse maintenance. It's not giving you all of those zeros. Now, this is a pretty weird way to cut it. If you're looking at this and following along and thinking, I have no idea what he did, I blinked and it's all shot right past me, that's okay. You will almost never need to do this. It's just for the few of you that might be following along and thinking, oh, wow, this is really cool. This is exactly what I've been looking for. Don't know why you've been looking for it, but there it is. It also means we can drag, say, problem type up into here, into the filter section. We've just got ourselves now a really simple, regular old service count. You'll notice referrals has turned into an actual proper number now. And we can actually filter it out and start saying, you know, I just want my service types by certain things, you know. I want to know how many of them fit into specific categories. It's just that way of kind of cutting the data in different sort of perspectives.
Hey James, are the N0 series of reports available to peaks?
Yes. Yes, I would say pretty confidently, but if that is a peak asking that question and they don't have access to it, please let us know because you should have that. Cool. That's pretty much it for those. I might start diving into some of the DIYs, which is the most exciting part of all of it. If you followed along now and you're thinking, wow, that's absolutely filled up my brain, that's all I have capacity for, that's cool. DIYs are probably going to maybe start to overwhelm just a little bit, that's okay. They are pretty hefty. This is definitely where we're getting into kind of the advanced use of things. So keep the questions coming. If you feel like you're starting to lag behind, please ask. All right. So straight away, when you're looking at DIY reports, your question is, well, what do I need a DIY report for? Why do I need this? Why can't I use the standard ones? Hopefully all these questions that we've had coming in saying, you know, hey, how do we do X, Y, Z in a report? And I've said, well, you can't, you'd need DIY reports for it. That's given you a bit of an idea. The idea is that DIY reports let you do whatever complicated query that you've actually got, because if we're just building you standardized reports, you're going to hit your limitations pretty quick. So straight away, we've got a bunch of different DIY templates. You always need to start from a template. And the difference between them is that different templates have different fields that you can drag in. For instance, DIY project service action. I know it's a bit of a weird name, but once you understand the naming convention of them, you kind of start to understand what fields you can expect. So if you wanted to run a DIY report that included fields on in services to the community, projects and project services and things based on that, then you just go into that DIY project service action, and all your fields that you're looking for are going to be included in that. But we don't need those same fields. We don't need the project fields in a report with your clients and services, because that data just doesn't overlap. You don't need to run reports on both of them at once. So we've got a separate one for that, just to keep things a little bit simpler and a little bit quicker on the system. 99% of the time, almost every single time, you're going to use DIY service client. Every single time someone calls up and says, hey, James, can I get a DIY report for something? This is the one that I've used. I reckon I've used different ones maybe half a dozen other times, and I do this every day, all day. So really, truly, just DIY service client. As you start getting into it, you might think, oh, wait a minute, I'm trying to find this field and it's not in this list. How do I do it? At that point, give us a call and just say, hey, I'm not able to do this. What's going on? Chances are we might say, oh, that's because you're trying to measure things on your additional parties. You're trying to look at how your actions are breaking down, things like that, at which point we might say, you know, try doing what you're doing, but in DIY service additional parties. That's kind of the logic behind it. It might feel a bit weird, but the more you kind of play around with it, the more it's going to make sense. Sorry, I'm going to mute myself and have a drink of water because I've been talking nonstop and I don't want you to all hear me drink water. All right, back at it, ready for round two. So, a lot of what you're going to see in a DIY report so far is going to be looking pretty familiar. Some of it's definitely new, some of it's definitely weird, but let's start straight away, start date and end date. We're fine. We know this, you've seen me go through this, we just pick a start date, we pick an end date. But in a DIY report, we've actually got rolling date ranges that we can use, and this is pretty cool. Instead of having to say, look, I want it for a financial year or something like that, you can just go into this one and say, hey, look, just tell me for the last 12 months to date. It's going to autofill saying what, you know, I know what day it is. So I can just put in the 29th of July, 2019. It knows the date, I don't. But what this means is that if you save this report because you've run a really complex query and it's just sitting there, you can load up this report and every day it's going to say, hey, let's update that information for what's relevant now. That's really valuable if you're, say, building a DIY report to tell you maybe all of the services done by individual workers or something like that. You can have it so that it just updates automatically to whatever time period you're in. I'm going to leave it at that. I reckon that's fine for me. The additional reporting dates, this is a bit of a fun one. Most of the time when you're dealing with funding agreements, they care about the services that you completed during a period. Now, overall, there's two types of services. You've got discrete services and you've got ongoing services. Discrete service is something like a legal advice, which as soon as you enter the open date, they're like, cool, that's delivered. You know, straight away, as soon as it exists in the system, it's delivered. Whereas the ongoing advice, as you're probably aware, it needs that close date to be able to say, oh, okay, now it's delivered. Now you've delivered the service. Most of the reports tend to look at things based on when a service is completed, meaning it doesn't pay too much attention to open ongoing services. It only looks at the closed ones. In a DIY report, you can change that. You can say, well, I don't just want things that are closed. I want everything opened within the period. That's all I want to touch on. You might say, well, I don't care when it was done. I just want everything that's open and ongoing since the start of time. And rather than having to go back years and years, we just built in a really quick little thing for you to say, look, we're only looking at these service types anyway. Here's a time period for you. I'm going to start with that one as I play around with it, because that might give you a bit of an idea of what's going on. Who knows? It'll be fun. Funding. Yep.
Sorry, on the, just going back to the closed part, does it count closed or is it the actual date closed?
Sorry, I don't quite understand the question.
Carly, do you want to come off mute and ask the question? Hello. Okay, I'll move on to it. Oh, go on. Go on.
Hi, yeah, just in our reporting, you can actually close the service and then the date is actually populated when it's checked by the principal solicitor.
Yep, gotcha. That is an extremely good question. I now completely understand. So what we're talking about is two different fields here. We're talking about service status, in which you can say whether a field is open, ongoing, closed, on hold, whatever. And we're talking about close date and which one of those is important for reporting. The important one for reporting is closed date. It only comes up in your closed services when it's got a closed date, because all the reports are looking at how much you did over a period of time between 2 points in time. Hopefully that makes sense. That is a very good question, something I should have discussed earlier.
Thank you.
All right, so I'll keep on going. We've got our funding categories here. Just going to select all of them as per usual. We've got a couple of filter fields here. I'm not actually going to dive into using them right now. I'll maybe talk about them in a little bit anyway. Just those tick boxes there, we'll come back to it. Now, if I load a report right now, it's going to come up with absolutely nothing. And that's because we haven't told this report to actually start measuring anything at all. What we need to do is I'm just going to right click anywhere where it says, you know, dropping items or fields here. I'm going to pull up my field list. There's a couple of different ways you can get to it. That's the way I like to. I find it simple. And this is where you can see all of the fields that we can include in a DIY report. There's a lot of them. There's not, as I said before, this isn't every single field in class. This is just all the fields in class relevant to services and clients. If you're looking for something and it's not in this list, we'll point you at a different DIY report that will include all of the ones that you're looking for. So I'm going to start including a few. I'm going to start on a really basic example. Let's say I'm looking for service type. I'm just using, you know, Control F or Command F, whatever you're on. Instead of scrolling through the massive list, I'm just searching for them. And I'm going to put service type up in those columns. I'm going to load the report now. It's not going to give me anything helpful, but I just want you to see what it's doing for me. So straight away it's saying, okay, for open ongoing services, first of all, if it's an ongoing service, that's only going to be one of 4 service types: court, tribunal, dispute resolution, ongoing non-legal support, and other representation. It's just saying this is what it could include over the time period. It's not telling me numbers. It's not telling me any useful information. If this is the end goal of a report, it's probably not a great report. But what we can do here is I'll move it from the columns into the rows. And you can just see that right now it's just giving me the list across the top. If I put it in the rows, it's just giving me the list down the side. That's pretty much all the change it's going to do. I'm going to include something else in here. Maybe I want to know for these services, what is the service status? And I'm dropping those in there as well. And it's telling me, look, for this time period, there could be blank. That's a possibility. It could have just not been filled out. Could be in progress. It could be on hold. It's still not actually telling me any useful information. What you really need ultimately are some numbers in here telling you how many things suit that criteria. And that's what we call a data item. Sorry, Claire, have you got a question?
Please could you add assigned to, because I know we've had a couple of questions on that recently.
Absolutely. You know what? I'm going to load this one. I'm going to make it helpful, and then I'm going to add assigned to into it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add in a data item. Now the data items are a little bit different on every DIY report, but it's really easy to work out what they are. First of all, it's not something like archive date. If I try and put it in the data items, it just doesn't go in. I click and drag, I put it there, and it just disappears. That's because you need really specific items to work in data items. And they all start with know of. That's the really simple, easy way to know what should go in there. And for us in this report, it's the number of clients that meet that criteria or the number of services that meet that criteria. I'm going to put in number of services because chances are if we're looking at service type and service status, that's what we care about. But let's say you had one client that for some reason had multiple court and tribunal services against them and all of those court tribunal services were on hold. You might only want to count them one, in which case you'd put in number of client. I'm just going to put in number of service. That's the one that makes sense to me. Most of the time, that's the one that's going to make sense. And suddenly, look at that, an actual helpful report. Now, what you might find in here is you might run this and you might have another column down the side that says, sure, you've got blank, you've got in progress, you've got on hold, but you've actually got closed. This, if anyone can take a screenshot and just screenshot exactly what I've got here, you should absolutely run this exact report on your own database because it's going to tell you if you've got any ongoing services that you reckon are closed, but the system is still treating as open, meaning they are not coming up in your reports, meaning that can be a really nice, easy way of just bumping up your stats right at the end of this financial year. If I ever do any center training, I run this report for them, and pretty regularly that's an extra 30 representation services right in the pocket, no effort. So please run this report yourself. All right, I'm going to start playing around with it. I'll drag and assign to, but before I do that, I'm actually going to swap these axes. I'm going to put service status in the rows, and I'm going to put service type in those columns. So I'll put service status down here first of all, just in those rows. And now it's telling us, look, for court and tribunal, these are the different service statuses, and that's where they total up to. We can swap those around as well. So right now it's grouping. Sorry, I have very disobedient cats that love to scratch everything, so I'm constantly pushing them away. Right now we're grouping everything by service type, and it's displaying those kind of by saying, you know, here's the service statuses for them. But we can swap those around and we can say, look, for each of the different service statuses, for instance, blank, in progress, on hold, whatever, here are the service types. It's just about swapping them and choosing the order you want things grouped by. I can now drag service type up into there. There we go. Or if I swap them, that one and that one up there. It's pretty much the exact same report. It's just now service types down the side, service statuses up the top. It's just about swapping them back and forth, whatever's going to make sense to you. It's nothing fancy. Hopefully it's nothing too terrifying. But what we might do is we might say, well, look, yeah, I want to group things by service status. I want to know the different service types we've got in there, but who's it assigned to? How do I know who's got everything on hold? How do I know who to kick up the butt to get things moving? And straight away, this is just going to give you a really quick breakdown. A lot of these are going to be zeros, and that's fine. But it's saying, look, for the ones on hold, for instance, it's all court tribunal services. There's only 2 of them anyway. One's assigned to Kumba and one's assigned to Phil. That's it. You might not want it as a table because that's going to bring up a whole bunch of zeros. For a lot of people, especially when they're starting out on looking at data, tables can be a bit overwhelming, but you know, ultimately an easy way to kind of build the data into. It can be a little bit more complicated to build a report like this, but it might make sense to actually not include something up in there, but drag that assigned to down maybe in here. Let's say for service type. So right now it's telling me, look, these are all the blanks, and on those court tribunals, this is who they go to. Or if we're going to swap them, let's put assigned to right before service type. It's going to say, look, for all the blanks, here's the ones assigned to demo account. These are their services. Or let's swap it again. Let's just say we're going to prioritize it by person.
Are there any rules and tips you can give about what works best in the rows and the columns, or is your advice to play around with it to see what data is, depending on what you want to find out, and you explore to find out what works? Yeah.
This is where I get my most romantic, which is a weird thing to say about data, but absolutely how I feel about data. Everyone has different styles of data, and that's what makes sense to them, how they best build a report. You might ask for the exact same report from me, from Samuel, from Ruben on the help desk, from anyone on the help desk, and get different DIY reports. And they're all going to answer your question. We're all going to build them slightly differently depending on what makes sense to us. So actually, that's probably a really good thing to say as well. If we ever build you a DIY report and you're looking at it and you're thinking, this doesn't quite make sense to me, there's nothing wrong with coming back to, say, me, if I'm the one who's built it, and said, thanks, I appreciate it. It's not quite clicking for me. I don't understand exactly what you've given to me. Can you grab Sam on it? You know, Sam's built me some DIY reports in the past. I really understand the way Sam presents data. Can you get Sam's eye on it? And we're happy to. There's no offense to that. Everyone has different styles. My style, in terms of where we would put things in columns or down here, and I'll just show you what the filter fields does. It's probably going to make sense straight away. But you know, you've got your service statuses, your service types. Now you can just say, look, I only care about the ones that are assigned to Bob Bobberson, for instance. Ultimately, you can do all that filtering while they're here. So there's nothing wrong with that. In terms of personal style, I don't use anything but rows. I would never put something in the columns. I would never put something in the filter items. I actually don't even use the data items. And I know that probably sounds a bit weird. For some of you, you're going to think, well, what do you mean you don't use data items? How is this now a helpful report? All you've done is take out the numbers. What I do is I actually go into here and I include the service IDs, because at the end of the day, I think that it's not that important how many of something there are. I can always count it. I can always put it in Excel and get it to sum it all up. But for me, I actually want to say, okay, these are the explicit service IDs that we need to satisfy the criteria of. We need to go into these ones and say, okay, these are the ones on hold. Let's go into each one of those and get it moving. You'll notice right now I've got absolutely everything in rows. It can become pretty unwieldy. You've got to know how it's going to group, and it takes a bit of practice. But at the end of the day, this is the data. This is how I like my data, because I build my data with the idea of it being exportable into Excel, importable into other data sets. All right. Have we got any questions coming?
Colin uses DIY reports often to find specific services. Is there a way to hyperlink the service ID in the report instead of having to go into a separate window to search and open the service?
Yeah. Sorry, you'll notice my terrible cat.
Oh, that's
currently
cute.
in the way. Okay, there we go. At the moment, no, they don't hyperlink. We've looked into it in the past. It really slows down the system, I'm sorry. It's a pain. You do have to go in and search for those things individually, and you can't just open them all up. But the amount that it slows down the system just wasn't feasible. It's not just slowing it down when you're clicking on the hyperlinks, it's slowing it down in general because it's trying to generate whenever those hyperlinks should be there. So yeah, we've looked at it. I'm really sorry, but it's just not something the system can really do.
That's good to know. Thanks for the explanation.
All right, cool. I might try building something else at this point, just for the sake of it, just so you can see something else. If anyone's got any suggestions for something I can build, something that they're thinking, wow, I'd love to use this for this particular purpose, if you can put it in the chat, and I'll trust Claire to choose one at random. But what I'll do, if people are suggesting now, I'll show you a few of the other things we can do with it. This report, you can obviously save it and say, look, this is a complete report. This is good. This one I'll call, I know it's a DIY, so I'm going to call it DIY service status by assignee. Right? It's good to have a naming convention so that when you're going to have 200 of these, hopefully not, but if you end up with 200 of these, you actually know the difference between them all. And you can kind of click on them by what makes sense. Once I've saved it, what I can actually do is go in and share the report. And I can say, well, you know, this information isn't just useful for me. All of these people who things are assigned to, they might want to see this information themselves. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to actually share it with all of my general staff. You know, they don't normally get access to reports, but I want them to have this particular one because it's really helpful to the work they do. When you do that, you're going to need to give them a little add-on permission. It's, I don't know if it's here exactly. There we go, add-on child DIY reports. You don't know how to do that, get in touch. We'll show you how to do it. You do it once and you're set. But the idea is I can now share this report with them and say, look, here's this information. You know what to do with it. I don't need to kind of handhold you for it. Get to it, essentially. And that's the way that you can kind of share those reports with whoever you want. I was just sharing it by role. You can do it with really specific particular individuals. When we build one for your center, which we get asked to do quite a lot, we tend to build one and then share it with you, just like I would then. You can do the same. So if you ever build a DIY report and it's not working for you and you're going to contact us, it's actually a really good thing for you to share that report with us so that we can come in and say, oh, you were really close with it, this is what you'd change, rather than just building you a new one from scratch. All right, have we had any ideas for something that I can build that makes a bit more?
Client name by service type by assigned to.
Let's do it. So I'm actually going to close this and open it again rather than removing everything one by one and dealing with that. I'm just going to save myself the effort. Just going to close it and reopen DIY service client. So there's plenty of things that we can do in here. I'm going to put in all this start date, end date stuff at the end. I'm just going to put the fields in first. So I believe it's first name is what we're looking for. Last name, there we go. And I'm about to really embarrass myself by showing how unimaginative I am because I just always put my own name into these things. So you're going to get 80,000 Jameses. First name, last name, let's say who it's assigned to, and who it's, and the service types attached to them. Now, I'm actually intentionally building this one so that it's going to look a little bit weird when it first loads. I'm kind of intentionally making a few mistakes. So please don't laugh at me when it looks awful. But I'll show you how to fix it up after we're done. I'm just choosing explicit date ranges here. I'm only looking at completed services. I'm not doing anything fancy at this point. And I'm just choosing my funding category there. Let's load that report. Alrighty. So straight away, we've got a few blanks here. Blank first name, blank last name assigned to this. Blanks here as well. Now, what you're noticing here is it's grouping things. Everything always groups by the field on its left. So it's grouping things by first name to say Aaron, and then we've got two options here, Katoomba and Shepparton, and then who it's assigned to. That's probably not how you want your data presented. It probably doesn't really make a whole lot of sense like that, and that's okay. How we would solve something like that is when we're trying to generate a report like this that I call a list report. You're generating a list of information. is you make sure that what you've got on the left is a unique identifier, something that's going to be unique for each of these individual things. So on this one, it might be a client ID. There we go. I'll chuck that one in there. And now you don't need to deal with that stress. This probably immediately looks like it makes a bit more sense. You've got your client ID, first name, last name, assigned to a service type. It's no longer trying to group things by anything. The only thing it is trying to group things by is, for instance, on this one, there's multiple assignees and multiple services. In theory, if someone had multiple names, it doesn't really work for this example because there's always a primary name. But if you're looking at all of their additional names, it might say, look, within this client ID, there's all of these different names that they go by. That might be another way of doing it. That's a quick example. This is the way that it makes sense to me. But what you might also want to do is say, I want to know the open date for all these services. Now I am going to show you one of those other tricks on these little tick boxes that I've been intentionally ignoring for a while now. Now, right now I'm putting open date up here. And we're just going to need to know, say, number of services that meet this criteria. There we go. As we start to add more things in, and especially when I've already loaded the report, it is going to take a little bit longer. I recommend putting in your fields in and then loading it, rather than loading it and then adding more and more fields, because it's just going to take a little longer. So we've got a bunch of different open dates in here, but what we can do is we can actually group them together by, let's say, month. That is not yours. Sorry, my cat is trying to eat my chocolate hazelnuts that are my reward treat for when we finish here. And there we go. I've grouped them individually by month. We've said, look, for the month of July 2019, these are the different services that came in there. What you might notice at the moment is if we, for instance, had no services in July 2019, it would actually come up as a blank. Wouldn't be all that helpful. What we can do is we can show all dates. And I don't use this one very often at all, but very, very occasionally. Probably not for something this complex, but for a simple report, you might just want to know for every day of the month exactly how many services you did, even if it was 0 on a particular thing. And you'll notice that what it's doing now is it's saying, and this is making a horrific mess and it's only covering a tiny, tiny bit of the screen, so hopefully you can see what I'm trying to do. It's essentially saying, look, here's all of the ones, you know, even if there's nothing in a particular month, even if there was nothing in December, it's still going to come up as a 0 in all of those. So there you go. It's not doing it by the individual open dates. It's just saying for the month, even if that month had 0 services, let's include it in there. That other little tick box that we had in there that include custom fields, that one's probably a bit of an obvious one now. If your center has customized your class database, as every center should, you're going to have custom fields in here just under CF, which stands for custom field, underscore, and then the name of the custom field. We group them all together like that, just so you know when it's a custom field. The problem is if you drag it in there, it's actually not going to load with any data. What you need to do is you need to include the custom fields and load the report. And that's just a little shortcut that we've kind of put in there to make things move a little bit faster when they need to. The only other tip that I can really give you on DIY reports in general is if you don't know exactly what you're doing and you think you're going to need to play around with it, don't load it for a full year, load it for a month. Just give yourself that tiny little snapshot, because at the end of the day, you're starting to see me with, you know, half a dozen different fields in here, cutting the information in a bunch of different ways. It's starting to slow down a little bit and chug along. If I'm only doing it on a month's worth of data, that gets a little bit easier, and that can be a really easy way of doing things. If you're starting to have trouble with your DIY reports because things are slowing down, have a chat with us. We're really good at making an impossible amount of data work in them. The largest center, I will not say who it is because that doesn't feel fair. The center with the largest amount of data, I have made a DIY report run for them on a 25-year period. If I can get that working, we can get anything working. So don't worry about the amount of data you have. If you're starting to run into issues, have a chat with us. We'll maybe tweak it and redesign it a bit to make things a little bit speedier for you. That's all I got on DIY reports. Is anyone holding on to any questions? Excellent. I'm going to assume that 50% of you have had things explained extremely well and you're totally across it, and 50% of you are bored out of your minds and have tuned me out as much as you can. I completely understand.
One or two specific examples, and Sam's has offered to run those through the help desk. So, and we encourage anyone else to do the same. If you've got a specific report you want help with, then ping us a ticket.
Absolutely. It's the kind of thing that it's really nice because we can just set it up once, be done with it, and you're good forever. I might transition off into accountability then. Does anyone have any more reporting questions before I tick all that off? Beautiful. If you're typing and they're just coming in slow, don't worry, you're going to have plenty of time. I will absolutely answer as many questions as I possibly can. You've got me until the end of time. I will stay on this Zoom call for you. All right, accountability. I want to start with a few of the theoreticals of accountability. I want to give you an idea for what it's used for and what its intention is. At the end of the day, accountability is the conversation between state program managers and centers. It's the idea of saying, you know, we've got these agreed upon sets of circumstances, this agreed upon information that the centers will provide to state program managers. Here's a platform through which you can do it. Every state uses it a little bit differently. There used to be a couple of states that didn't use accountability at all. I don't know that there still are. I think everyone's kind of transitioned onto using at least some of it. Some states use absolutely everything in here. Some states don't. We don't really know exactly which ones you're expected to use and which ones you aren't. But the easy way to know is to hop on in to accountability. And I'm talking about this from a center perspective. Just keep that in mind here. Hop on in, put in your relevant financial year. So let's say you're planning for the year ahead, or let's say last year, right? You're filling in all your stuff from last year. We know that that is what year is it? It's 2020, right? Yeah, cool. I'm getting some nods. It's 2019/2020. There we go. In the brackets, it's going to tell you which reporting body it is you're dealing with. We've got a fake one in here because we're a fake center. You're going to have, you know, New South Wales, WA, ACT, whoever's relevant to you at the time in here. I know that there are some centers that do sit on a border. There's, you know, you might actually have to fill out this for both Victoria and New South Wales, in which case you're not just going to have one set of reports to fill out. It's going to be two of them. Sorry, that's not nice, but you know, that's the way it is. So you'll notice in here, we've basically got ourselves a set of reports. You can go on in there and you can actually see if they've got a due date linked to them. I'll let this one load up and we'll make a call based on that. There we go. So this one doesn't have a due date. As a good rule of thumb, that may well mean that you actually just don't need to do that DIY report. Sorry, my head's in DIY report. You don't need to do that accountability report. If you do need to do that accountability report, but there's no due date, hopefully you're already aware of it. If you're really unsure, if you think, I'm pretty sure I should be doing this, but there's no date for it, chat with your state program manager. This is to facilitate the conversation, but it's probably not the only conversation you should have with your state program manager. I'm going to give you a few examples of how to put them in, because once you know how to do a couple of them, you can do any of them. You can do any of the ones you're required to. I like to say that they're easy, but they're not intuitive. And that just means that if you're looking at this for the first time, it's probably going to make very little.
Okay, James is frozen. So we'll just wait for his connection to come back. Sam, can you hear me? Are you online?
Yes, I can hear you, Claire.
All right, it's just James that's gone. We'll just wait for him to come back. His connection will come back shortly.
Yeah, sure. I'd offer to take over, but he's sharing his screen, not mine, so that could make things a bit tricky.
Yes, bear with me a second. Okay, you should be able to share your screen now, Sam.
Sure.
I think we've lost James, actually.
Okay, that's not what we need. That's what we need. Okay, just give me a minute. I need to pop that on. Okay. So we're talking about accountability. I kind of forget where James had gotten up to. I'm also just checking some notes I had about this.
It's all right.
Okay. All right, let me try this. So okay. Not sure if James had explained this, but basically you get different kinds of reports. So you've got funds reports, budgets, what are the other ones? Compliance reports, we'll go through those, and annual targets, or annual reports, or annual targets. There's our annual targets for this year. Okay, so before I go through those, I will go back to some of the things that James was explaining. Just open one. So as James was saying, we'll just let this load up.
I am back now as well.
Okay.
Things crashed and I'm here. God, I love to teach people about technology, huh? Really builds a lot of faith in you all and the information I'm giving you if my own technology crashes, right?
Right.
Do you want to share your screen, James? How do you want to play it from here?
Yeah. I'll share my screen. We'll keep on.
Seamless, guys. Proud of you. Good work.
That's the only issue that we have this time. So thank you everyone for your patience. Let's see if we can get on back. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to jump into a specific one. I'm just going to choose Progress Report 1. This is one of the most simple ones. It kind of gives you the format for what you're going to see on pretty much all of them. Can everyone see an accountability page right now? Excellent. You can tell that I've delivered a few too many presentations to a blank screen. So I'm going to check every time that it's still there. Okay. So really on this one, we've only got two tabs, Basic Details and Documents. These two tabs are actually going to be on every accountability report, no matter which one it is you select. Some of the other accountability reports do have a few extra things, and I'll show you examples of them to clear all that up for you. But no matter what report you click on, you're always going to have Basic Details and you're going to have Documents. You're only really using the Documents one if you're uploading the, if you've got like a document that you are intending to upload. You're probably not just going to jump in and do it for the fun of it. It works exactly the same as uploading a document to a client record or a service record or anything else in class. You just go through New, I'm not actually going to upload something now because all that I have on my computer is Dungeons and Dragons handbooks, because of course I do. But ultimately you just select a particular document type. You can customize that if it's something you want to use. But at the end of the day, you're just uploading it so that at the other end, the State Program Manager can download it. It's nothing that an email doesn't do, but you know, it's nice to have it there anyway. Ultimately, the way that it works is you've got this comment section. You can write whatever you want in there. Hi, SPM. That's your State Program Manager. If you really feel like being mean and rude about your State Program Manager, maybe don't do it there because they will be able to see it. Find a different place to do it. Just a quick heads up. I don't think it's happened yet, but you know, it's an easy way to just put a comment in there and say, you know, let me know if issues, or you know, whatever kind of comment that you need to make. It's not a really formalized way. It's just something we include in there. In theory, if there is an actual due date attached to the accountability report, it'll be in there. If you've got an agreed upon extension date, that'll also be included in there. Everything starts from a draft status. When you need to actually submit it, so let's say in this one, you upload your document, you write your thing, everything's good, the world is perfect, you're ready to submit it. You just go over to where it says draft, change it to submitted, and you hit save. Done. It's that simple. You have now submitted your report. Let me show you this. Sorry, it's all a little bit slow at the moment, hence why it crashed for me earlier. You'll see now that date submitted has automatically been filled out. Once it's submitted, your State Program Manager has a look at it and then they approve it, at which point you'll get a date approved. Wonderful, fantastic. Or they will change it to not approved, at which point it goes back to you. You can change it, you can make whatever adjustments you need to, and you can change it back from not approved to submitted again. It is important to know that once you've submitted it, you can't make any changes. So if you hit submitted and you realize, oh, wait a minute, there's a horrific typo in here somewhere, there's nothing you can do about it until that report gets not approved by your State Program Manager. Occasionally, we do get centers calling us up and saying, oh, I just submitted this thing, but I realized I forgot something. Can you just send it back to us? We can't actually do that. That needs to be done by your State Program Manager, only because with a name like accountability, there is a level of accountability that needs to be had, and we can't put ourselves in that process. It's not a big deal. Typos get made all the time. Plenty of reports get not approved, fixed up and sent back. It's okay, don't freak out about it. It's not a big process for anyone to deal with. But just know that if it is submitted, you can't make any changes unless that comes all the way back to you then. On extensions and things like that, there are a couple of sections, you know, adjust extension dates and show adjustments. Once you've done it a couple of times, it's pretty simple. But essentially you just say, hey, look, I think that it's going to take me an extra month to get something out. And you can give a bit of reasoning why and go through all that. Ultimately, a lot of that conversation probably shouldn't happen in here. You should probably have an actual conversation with your State Program Manager. Don't want to save any of that. Because you'll suggest that change and then it's up to them to approve or not approve the extension date. You don't need to suggest one as well. If an extension date is agreed upon by you in another conversation, they can just add it in. You don't need to be the one suggesting it. I just wanted to show you that there is a mechanism for that in there. All right, that's kind of about as simple as it gets. I'm going to start showing you some of the more complex ones, but at no point does it get so complex that I think anyone should be worried. It's pretty straightforward. Annual targets, that's a good one. So if I go into annual targets, you're going to see what looks like a lot of pretty familiar stuff. First of all, we've got the basic details tab, everything as per usual. We've got ourselves a documents tab. Again, everything as per usual. All that's changed is we've got an extra one in here, annual targets, which of course is only on the annual targets accountability report. This one's really easy. You just go in, you find the line that's relevant for what you're looking for. Let's say number of legal advices. You jump in, you add whatever number it is you need to, and you'd hit save. I can't edit it on this one right now because this one's already submitted, as you can see there. But it's still fundamentally the same thing. It's quite an easy process. A couple of niggling things that people tend to bring up and just say, oh, that's not exactly what we need. But unfortunately, it's what most people need. So it's kind of how the system is set. We do still have advices and task targets broken down by delivery type. If your state doesn't actually specify, you know, you need to do legal advices by person, telephone, letter, fax, email, and here are the numbers for each of those different methods, just add them in however makes sense to you. It'll just add up to your total legal advice targets. It does the calculation automatically. It's not a big deal. You can even probably just, if it's not specified and you don't have your own internal guides that you're working to, you probably just put the full number under in person and call it a day. Another thing that gets brought up occasionally is whether or not you can do the annual targets by individual funding categories. No, you can't. It's kind of a complicated solution to it. Some states really want it by individual funding categories, but some states just want one total number. So we're looking into a compromise. Maybe one day we'll have one, but it's one of those kind of complicated things that at the moment, it's just these are your overall targets and this covers everything. So if you're getting targets from multiple different sources, just be aware that this one here isn't really your center's annual targets. These are the annual targets that are agreed upon by you and your state program manager. I'll hop on out of that one and I'm going to show you a different one. And this is kind of the third type, the budget and funds reports. So straight away, we've got basic details. Great, fantastic, that's familiar. We've got documents, we know exactly what that is. No issues there. But we got ourselves reports, other incomes, and consolidated. These ones are new. Totally understand that this can be a little bit more of the complex, but at the end of this, you will have seen every possible format an accountability report can come in, and you'll be able to tackle anything in front of you. So these ones are specifically set out because they are the financial accountability reports. It covers the 6-month fund report, the 12 months funds report, and the budget for the year ahead. They're all set out the same. Start by going into reports. I don't know if I've got anything in here. I do, excellent. So in this drop-down menu, I've got generalist services. A really common issue that we have is senders will call us up and say, hey, I'm trying to fill out a funds report. I can't actually do it though because I don't have any funding categories available to me. That's fine, it's not an issue. It just means that your state program manager hasn't yet set up the funding categories in there. So we can facilitate that conversation between you and your state program manager. But if you remember this conversation, and fingers crossed you will, it's not actually us that can fix that one. It's your state program manager. So we're happy to put you in touch, but at the end of the day, if you just get in touch with your state program manager, they should be able to fix that one for you. So from there, it's just as simple as adding in the relevant amounts. I'm in a funds report. So what that means is I'm saying, you know, these are the various numbers that apply to the situation. But it'll actually have the old budget report that we've put together so that it'll work out a variance for you. So if I say, you know, the year-to-date budget is 600, I'm going to put in 450, for instance. I'll just let that refresh. Oh, I should save it actually, shouldn't I? 450, save. There's a variance of 150 there. And over the year, there's a 37.50, whatever. It does all the calculations for you in that regard. At the end of the day, if you start looking through a lot of these financial figures and you start thinking, oh, should something go in X, Y, or Z? Where do things fit? We can't really give you too much guidance on this. If anyone were to look at any of my old collections of receipts, you would completely understand that I'm not the right person to ask financial questions from. Please don't ask me a financial question. It will make me terrified. Anything in this section, anything that's unusual and you're not sure how to record it, talk to your state program manager about how they want it recorded. We often have centres looking to put in information in here that isn't state program manager funded. It's actually separate funding. Unless your state program manager says, we want you to report on all of the funding you receive, not just the stuff from us, you don't need to put it in here. This is, again, not a place for you to collect all of your relevant centre information. This is explicitly what the state program manager has agreed that you need to see between the two of you. So if you don't have the particular funding category for your state program manager services in here, and it's something completely separate, that's probably okay. Just means you don't need to include it in there. That's all right. We do have a few other things in here. So other incomes, this is where you would just say, look, here's this other external thing. Let's say Joe from down the block gave you $1,000 to get a fancy new desk, and for some reason you need to include it. There you go. There's a little section in here. It's not complicated. You just put in the amount, the source of who it's from, purpose, if it's supplementary to an existing funding category, whether or not you're recording activities against it in class. Most of the time, I find that people don't need to use the other income section, but it's there in case you do. And the consolidated tab essentially says, well, look, if you've had to record things against 6 different funding categories, for instance, let's just smush them all together, add them up, and compare it to everything else that you've got in here. It's just kind of a final simplifying way to put it all together. Just remember that at the end of it, save the tab that you're on if there's a little save button up here. Head over to basic details, draft, submitted, and hit save. I'm not going to hit save now, because I like having something that I can go back to and give demonstrations on. But at the end of it, it never gets more complicated than that. It is something that you only touch every 6 months. You're going to forget stuff every 6 months. There's going to be a few things that you're going to think, oh, I just don't know this. Have a chat with us. If you think that it's going to be 2 minutes for you to write out an email to us, but 10 minutes for you to search around and sort it out, get in touch with us. Make it simple and make it easy on yourself, and just put all the thinking onto us if you can. Are there any questions? That is the entirety of accountability. There's nothing else that I can possibly show you, but if I haven't explained something, let me know. Are there any questions there?
We've also got last week's accountability recording up on the website in the link that I posted in the chat earlier. So if there's something you didn't quite catch and you just want to catch up quickly, then please head to that link, scroll up on the chat, and we've got that session up. And this session will be up shortly as well. We don't have any questions coming through. So I'm just going to start winding up. James, and if something comes through, I'll let you know.
Sure. Thanks everyone for coming on. This has been really good. We don't tend to combine these two sessions, but right now it's all kind of linked and muddied together. And if you're doing one, you're probably doing both. So try to just smush them all together. Hopefully you got what you came for. If you didn't, please let us know. As much as I personally do these for fun, the rest of the team does them to help people. So if there's anything that we can do to make these more useful or cover material that you thought was going to get covered but we haven't really, please let us know. Anything that kind of sparks your mind, bring it to the help desk. It's what we're there for. If you need someone to just kind of hold your hand a little bit because maybe it's the first time that you're going through this and you just need that bit of guidance, it's what we're there for. Cool.
Great. That's it.
I might sit around for an extra minute or so in case questions are coming through slowly and people really want stuff answered. But apart from that, look at that. That's a little early, right? Done.
Yeah, we'll sit on the call and just close out the Zoom. Feel free to leave. It's been great to have you on board. Thanks for coming. Thanks for your time.